Governor Bob Ferguson today was in Seattle at Food Lifeline, their headquarters, and that's where he held this big press conference surrounded by supporters of the recently signed into law income tax, or for now, what is a tax on millionaires, those making a million or more, taxed 9.9% of that threshold above $1 million or the combined household income in excess of $1 million. And in this press conference, several people spoke, but I'm going to share with you the governor's comments specifically, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, this income tax repeal initiative, we'll just call it 645. It's got a longer title. It's IP 26, which is the year 2026. IP is Initiative to the People, 645. They've made these initiatives so complicated now. So we'll just call it 645 from here on out. Okay. That is the hoped repeal if voters should choose to repeal the income tax. We're waiting right now to find out if, in fact, the Secretary of State is going to certify that for the November ballot. It is likely that that is going to happen. Supporters of the repeal turned in more than 511,000 signatures on July 2nd. They only need about 309,000 of those to be valid voter signatures to qualify. Now, some of those get tossed out because people accidentally sign twice or maybe intentionally sign twice, not realizing you can't do that. Other people sign who are not already registered voters in the state of Washington. Those also get tossed out. But assuming that this is certified, and we'll find out in the next week or so from Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, it will be on the November ballot. So now Governor Ferguson, as I mentioned today, was surrounded by income tax supporters in this press conference, again, held at the headquarters for Food Lifeline in Seattle. Here's part of what he said.
Washingtonians are going to be facing an important choice in November regarding the future of the millionaire's tax. It's essentially a choice between moving our state forward by making life more affordable for Washingtonians and giving 138,000 business owners a tax break, or going backwards, rolling back tax breaks for small businesses and seeing costs go up for Washingtonians. It's a choice between investing in our kids' education, and it's great to see some kids here today, by the way. It's a choice between investing in our kids' education and childcare access and affordability, or going backwards with cuts to education and limiting access to childcare. In short, it's a choice between the future and the past. I am confident Washingtonians will see through this attempt to roll back our progress, because that's what they have done before. Hedge manager Brian Haywood is, of course, behind this initiative. It is not his first rodeo. 3 prior attempts he has made to roll back progress in Washington state. Capital gains tax, he put that on the ballot. 64% of Washingtonians rejected his attempt to roll that back. The Climate Commitment Act, once again, over 60% of Washingtonians rejected his attempt to roll that back. Washington Cares, 55% of Washingtonians rejected that attempt to roll back progress. In other words, he's 0 for 3. He is struck out. He's back at the plate again, which is absolutely his right. But it is clear that while Brian Haywood has a vision for this state, it just happens to be a vision that the people of Washington repeatedly reject overwhelmingly.
So from here on out, you will start to see, and as we get closer to November, more and more advertisements on both sides of this heated argument. It's going to be on your TV, your radio, your social media feeds. You're probably not going to be able to get away with it because this is considered to be one of the most contentious ballot issues that has been debated in the state of Washington in any recent history. Now, supporters of the millionaire's tax are funded by some pretty deep pockets. They've got the Washington Education Association, which is the state teachers union, some other labor groups, WFSE, SEIU, locals are all dumping tons of money into convincing voters not to repeal the income tax. And then you've got Let's Go Washington and supporters, including the NFIB, BIAW, and others that are going to be dumping money into convincing you to support the income tax repeal. Something that the governor mentioned in that clip we just shared with you, I wanted to provide a little greater context on because he mentioned that Let's Go Washington and founder Brian Haywood were 0 for 3 in previous failed attempts on initiatives. And he mentioned that it was he mentioned the capital gains tax, the Climate Commitment Act, and the Washington Cares Fund taxes. And in fact, Washington voters rejected all three of those repeal attempts. But what the governor failed to mention in that press conference, in that clip you just watched, was that Let's Go Washington has had many successes. And they also have two additional initiatives that are already qualified for the November ballot. We talked a lot about these. Voters are going to be asked in November if they want to restore the Parental Bill of Rights and if they want to protect girls in sports and keep boys and trans identifying folks out of girls' locker rooms and bathrooms and the like. So the three Let's Go Washington initiatives that actually passed into law successfully were Initiative 2081 that created the original Parents' Bill of Rights, allowing, parents to review school curriculum, medical records, and they can't keep secrets from you. Initiative 2111, that permanently, obviously that didn't work, permanently banned state and local personal income taxes in Washington. The lawmakers went on, as you know, to pass the millionaire's tax this year. And Initiative 2113, which loosened police pursuit rules by restoring the reasonable suspicion standard and restoring police ability to again pursue criminals has been credited with a dramatic drop in car theft and many other crime statistics in the state of Washington. In fact, I had a conversation just yesterday on Monday with Federal Mayor Jim Farrell, and I'll be sharing some of those dramatic crime stats with you later this week. And he cited specifically the passage of 2113, allowing police again to pursue criminals in the state of Washington, in large part for bringing down some of those, shocking crime statistics. And then one more that Let's Go Washington was behind was Initiative 2066 2 years ago that protects access to natural gas as an energy choice, and voters approved that one. So not really accurate to say that Let's Go Washington is 0 for 3. So I wanted to provide some accurate comment on that. That's the real record for Let's Go Washington at this point. So Brian Haywood and Let's Go Washington issued a statement just after the governor's press conference today, along with those other folks that are hoping folks will keep the newly passed income tax. And Haywood said this in part. Three public unions, I mentioned these a moment ago, SEIU, WEA, WFSE, are primarily behind this attempt to force an unconstitutional income tax on the state. These three already take in over $150 million every year, yet somehow are exempt from paying any taxes. The public unions have a collection of sock puppet politicians like J.B. Peterson, sponsor of the income tax, and Governor Bob Ferguson, who appear to be in their pocket and who are afraid to stand up and challenge the pig trough agenda of more spending and higher taxes. Again, that was from Let's Go Washington founder Brian Haywood in that statement emailed to the Center Square today. And then Jesse Proudman also issued a statement that went with Let's Go Washington's news release today. He's the founder of Venice AI. Seattle native has continued to voice his concerns about the income tax and the volatility of taxing a wealthy base. And we interviewed Jesse Proudman 2 months ago about his concerns with the income tax. So I wanted to share that with you once again.
I started my first company from my dorm room at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. That company went on to be acquired by IBM in 2015, and I followed that on with two additional startups here in the state. I remember being a kid in Tacoma, coming to Seattle in early 2000, and just being in awe of the startup community here. I had to do a paper in middle school about technology and startups, and came and interviewed GoToNet executives on the pier at the waterfront. And it was really that experience that motivated me to get up into the startup ecosystem. The reality that you can build and create something from nothing, it's an inspiring vision, and one that really should and can get people ready to sort of pick themselves up from their bootstraps and create the companies that have made this region great. We look at the names that we see in the news on a day-to-day basis: Boeing, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon. These are all companies that were started by some founder here in the state and have grown to provide jobs for so many people. And so as I've watched sort of the progression and the villainization of the entrepreneurs in Washington over the last number of years, and then more importantly with this specific law, it's really become frustrating and depressing to think about what this state would be like without that entrepreneurial spirit. The reality is that this law specifically targets and penalizes entrepreneurs. You think about an entrepreneur who starts a business and for many years earns below market wages. And if they are very lucky, a very small chance of success, and they get an exit, they sell their company, the state now comes to take 10% of that success. You compare that to the large corporations that are already earning sort of substantial profits in the state, who aren't going to end up paying any taxes with this illegal and unconstitutional income tax. Like it doesn't logically make sense. And it's not just entrepreneurs, it's small family businesses who also have the same challenge in front of them. Because of the way the tax is structured, sort of pass-through income for LLCs and S-corps ends up being paid as well. So it's really a targeted tax against a very narrow cohort of people in Washington by design. The reality, though, is that the state is not targeting just that cohort. With 300 bureaucrats being hired to go police what is estimated to be roughly 20,000 eligible taxis under the law, it's clear they're building a structure to tax ultimately everybody in the state. And Jamie Peterson has made that clear, that is his intent and that this is a starting place. And so sort of all of these things, in my mind, really have made this an unfriendly and unfortunate place to do business.
And now this is a Yakima former farmer by the name of John Hubricksy. I think I'm pronouncing that right. A fifth generation farmer. He's no longer in farming, but fifth generation for his family to farm in Yakima. And he attended the July 2nd event in Tumwater at the office of the Washington Secretary of State. When Let's Go Washington turned in those boxes and boxes of all the signed petitions for the income tax repeal. And he spoke at that event, but I haven't shared any of that with you until today. He shared with the crowd that was gathered there that he's not farming anymore because he was losing money. He's now actually a CPA helping other family farmers try to stay in the business. In Washington State, we've been losing an average about 2 family farms a day. I covered a story last year that looked at stats for a 5-year period with a loss of 3,700 family farms in the state of Washington, losing more family farms than any other place in the nation. And he believes that the passage of the income tax for many family farms will actually be the final straw.
They cannot stretch any further. They've suffered year after year after year losses. And that's not a joke. Year after year after year. Their banks cannot stretch any further, and they're going bankrupt. We've lost more than 10% of our family farms in Washington State. Part of the capital-intensive nature of farming that is so hard to bear for the family farm when additional regulations and additional taxes are put on the family farm is the competition they now face. If we're growing apples as a family farm, we're not competing with institutional money that is the only source of capital anymore that can compete and suffer through the regulatory environment here and continue on. The family farms cannot. They're not in a position to bear the burden of the taxation and regulatory environment that we now have here in Washington State. What profits there used to be in family farming will no longer stay in my community. They will not be reinvested in our schools. They will not be reinvested in our sports complexes for the kids. They will not be reinvested, period, because the money will flood out of the community when it goes to institutions that are nameless and faceless and somewhere else. The family farms can't bear the burden anymore. The income tax that was passed is just the latest instance of the burden increasing year after year.
Now, Governor Ferguson said today he is entirely confident that Washington voters are going to reject the income tax repeal initiative, while at the same time, Haywood and Let's Go Washington said they're confident that voters are going to vote yes on Initiative 645 to reject the income tax. And again, we're waiting on the Secretary of State to officially certify that measure for the fall ballot. But certainly, given how many signatures were turned in, it is highly likely we're going to see that in November. Now, a new poll obtained by the Center Square shows Washington voters are opposed to the state's new income tax by a 3-1 margin, with 57% then saying they believe they're all going to have to eventually pay that income tax, regardless of how much money they earn, even though at this point it is initially just a millionaire's tax, a tax of 9.9% on income above $1 million. Now, the survey was conducted by a group called Signal on behalf of Concerned Taxpayers Accountability Center, CTAC. So they surveyed 800 likely general election voters between May 13th and 15th. So this poll is a couple of months old. In addition to questions about the new income tax, as I mentioned, these respondents were asked about how they feel about Governor Ferguson. Are you happy with the job he's doing? And then how do you feel about the direction of the state? So on income tax opinions, it was 67% opposed and 21% in favor. And of those opposed, 60% said they are strongly opposed. About 6% in the poll were undecided. Another 6% said they neither supported nor opposed the income tax, really just had no opinion on it. Then respondents were asked about messaging on both sides of the income tax debate. I found this pretty interesting. Messaging from supporters of the tax, of course, says it's only going to affect people that make $1 million or more, and it's going to fund all these important programs, education programs, and healthcare and transportation. Messaging from opponents of the income tax, of course, say they believe is eventually going to be a tax on all levels of income earned. And they also argue it is unconstitutional. So respondents sided with the opposition statement by a margin of 57% to 30%. So I found that pretty interesting. They found broader agreement with the argument that they believe it's unconstitutional and that eventually everybody is going to pay the tax. Now, another one of the questions is Washington on the right track? Poll participants were asked about the direction of the state and if they believe things are headed down the right track. And 54%, you see, said our state is on the wrong track compared to 37% who believe we're headed in the right direction. And 39% actually said we're definitely on the wrong track versus just 3% said definitely right track. So some pretty strong opinions about the direction of the state. And then again, the poll findings when it comes to Governor Bob Ferguson and his favorability, 49% held an unfavorable view of the governor, 39% viewed him favorably. And among those who hold the unfavorable view of the governor, 37.4% held a very unfavorable view. Those with a favorable view, just 11.6% said very favorable. So the poll results come, of course, as Washington voters are very likely to consider the income tax on the fall ballot. We're waiting any day now for the office of Steve Hobbs, our Secretary of State, to officially certify the initiative that would repeal the income tax should voters decide to vote yes. That's Initiative 645. They turned in more than 500,000 signatures for folks saying we want this repeal to be on the ballot. They only need 309,000 valid voter signatures. So even if about 200,000 get tossed out, it is very likely this will, in fact, appear on the November ballot. And then we have a legal challenge underway by Citizen Action Defense Fund. That lawsuit contends the tax is unconstitutional because our state constitution says that our income is our property and it must be treated uniformly and capped at 1% as property. So they believe it's unconstitutional. Um, Meantime, we had supporters of the income tax launching on Tuesday of this week their formal campaign to push against the repeal attempt. And at that event on Wednesday, which was held at Food Lifeline in Seattle, you had Food Lifeline CEO Stephen Davis coming up and talking about why he believes the income tax is necessary to, among other things, ensure food programs aren't cut.
By fully funding breakfast and lunch for every K 12 student in Washington, we can ensure that every child has access to nutritious food throughout the school day. The research shows that when there's a universal school meals in place, not only does student learning improve and academic success, but also it reduces a household's food insecurity rate by nearly 20% by those families most at risk. From Food Lifeline's perspective, and our partner network of more than 300 organizations that serve their local communities, the stakes of this initiative could not be any higher. Today, one in eight individuals that live in Washington is food insecure, and 1 in 6 children. We believe Initiative 645 would jeopardize the critical investments that help address these challenges and would make it harder for too many of our neighbors to put food on the table. That's why Food Lifeline is proud to stand with so many partners across Washington in support of the No on 645 campaign.
Let's Go Washington provided a statement this morning based on the poll results. And the statement said, in part, Bob Ferguson has ignored Washingtonians' opposition to the income tax since the day he signed it. Today's poll confirms nothing has changed. Voters still don't want it. Yesterday, they say Ferguson and his allies spent 45 minutes spreading lies about the repeal. The truth is that voting yes preserves funding for the working families tax credit, paid family leave, sales tax reductions, and small business relief. Again, that was from Let's Go Washington in a response to the Center Square sent via text after those poll results came out. And Washington GOP Chairman Jim Walsh also texted a statement in response to the poll saying the Ferguson Peterson state income tax scheme is wildly unpopular. If anything, this poll may understate how unpopular the scheme really is. Now, an exciting day in CTAC today as the Association of Washington Business and Washington Roundtable held their second annual Economic Future Solutions Summit. And some prominent political figures were in attendance, including former Governor Gary Locke, who I had a chance to pull aside after he left the stage. And of course, talk of the income tax. And on Thursday, in case you missed it, or rather Wednesday, yesterday, Let's Go Washington's income tax repeal initiative, I 645, was officially certified by Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. So that will be on your November ballot. It had a greater than 80, I think 82% validity rate when they check a few of those, more than a few, but many of those petition sheets of the 511,000 plus that were submitted. And they're finding a very, small rate of voter signatures being invalidated. So they're automatically moving that on to the November ballot. But former Governor Locke, when he was on stage talking, he was very concerned, he said, about the fact that Democrats, especially those crafting the budgets in Olympia, are spending beyond their means, are not working within their budget. He talked a lot about when he was governor of the state of Washington, he really focused on and he created something called POG, the priorities of government, where he went to all the agency heads and said, okay, what really are your priorities? And he said that was a difficult balance, but you can't be crafting budgets that are spending more than the Economic Revenue Council says you're going to be bringing in, which he said is what they're doing now. And he called that irresponsible. Um, he said, you're never going to bring in enough money to make everybody happy. And you have to learn to say no. So after he got done speaking, he was quick to leave the conference room there at the Hilton at SeaTac. So I chased him out, and he was kind enough to give me a few moments to talk. And here's part of that conversation.
There's no budget discipline. They're taking one-time money and creating permanent programs without any thought as to how are they going to sustain that program when that one-time money goes away, or they're borrowing money from various accounts and um, not knowing how they're going to pay that back, and then how they're going to sustain that program that they borrowed the money for, if and when they return that money back to the original fund. So I think spending is out of control in Olympia. They need much more discipline. They need to set priorities. And when they say that they're going to create a program and they ask the voters to approve of that particular program, they need to make sure that they don't take that money a few years later and spend it on something else, because then the voters lose faith, whether it's with their city government, county government, or state government. Well, already they've committed that source of money to various programs, but they're already facing a budget deficit 2 years from now. So, um, what's going on? They say that this was necessary to uh, balance the budget, but even with that money, they're facing a deficit. And will they even be able to use that money for the programs that they've promised the voters?
Now, at that AWB and Washington Roundtable Economic Futures conference today, there were several sessions with various speakers and moderators. And one of those speakers was former lawmaker, now president and CEO of the Bellevue Chamber, Joe Fame. He was up there along with Steve Mullen, former president of the Washington Roundtable, and both of them very critical of the state's overspending and taxes and regulations and driving out business and wealth from the state of Washington. And I caught up with Joe Fain just after he left the stage.
Yeah, I think from a budget and spending standpoint, the most important thing that we need to do is just be honest about what the numbers are. If you look at the last few years of state spending, we always end up in deficit territory. And in large part, it's because we've just got the wrong data that we're relying on going in. Not because we don't have access to the right data, but we're making intentional choices to use the wrong data. We're making intentional choices to assume that our economy is growing faster than our experts at the state are even telling us. We're making the intentional decision to say that we're not going to have any costs associated with things like lawsuits and settlements, because if we have to book those expenses, we can't spend money elsewhere. And the list goes on and on and on about ways that we are being irresponsible and unsustainable in the way that we're building our budgets. If we just fix those things, we won't head back to Olympia every year and need massive tax increases to backfill the budget. And we can actually put our state back on a more sustainable growth, which is also really valuable for the public sector, for the public that relies on public sector services. Stable governance, stable budgets, it helps those people the most. We shouldn't pretend that our regressive tax structure is the perfect tax structure for a state. We should have an honest conversation about that. I do think the massive year-over-year increases, whether it's the capital gains tax at 7.7 and then the 9.9 and then the new millionaires tax or the income tax at 9.9, the thing that concerns me the most is so much, so fast, over such a narrow tax base. We are now balancing the future of our public sector in Washington state off of 9,000 tax returns in a population of over 7 million in our state. 9,000 of the wealthiest, most mobile individuals, and we're putting all of our future bets on their willingness to continue to be here and to continue to earn here, and that they will continue to pay this tax. That is that's a huge gamble, and it's not a sustainable one. And so wherever folks come down on the regressivity of the state's tax program, or where we might need new revenues for new state spending and new programs that are important, we cannot build a sustainable budget with a house of cards.
Now, I wish I could have had the time to stay for the entire events for AWB and the Washington Roundtable, because there were so many discussions on the agenda for the rest of the day, especially an afternoon discussion with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. It's Noel Frame and Steve Berquist, both Democrats, and Chris Gildon and Ed Orcutt, both Republicans, with a panel moderated this afternoon by Morgan Irwin with AWB. So that's going to be an interesting one. I have no doubt that Morgan Irwin, as moderator, is going to press them about the income tax and about Olympia's insatiable appetite for overspending what we're bringing in despite record revenue. And so TVW was there. I imagine the entire day's conference is going to be uploaded. I intend to look back at that discussion in particular, as well as others, to bring you for episodes for Friday and Monday on Washington in Focus Daily.